Hi, my name is Jayreid. I'm a psychotherapist in San Francisco, California. And today I'd like to talk about how the only thing to do for the scapegoated victim of narcissistic abuse is survive. I wanted to talk today about how the single thing that a scapegoated victim must do in the face of narcissistic abuse is survive in an effort to cultivate an attitude of respect and appreciation for how one survived narcissistic abuse when it was occurring, and also the sort of meta perspective on one's own efforts in the today after the abuse in recovering from it. A common sentiment I've noticed that survivors of narcissistic abuse, particularly those in the role of scapegoat, may have towards themselves and their process of recovery is one of frustration, impatience, even disappointment in themselves for not doing something different, either when they were being abused or while they were efforting to recover from it. The implication is that there, sort of as they look back, there's sort of this seems like a matter of not if, but when they find the thing they didn't do enough of, or did too much of, or just plain did the wrong thing and should have done or known otherwise. In thinking about the ways one survives scapegoated narcissistic abuse, some of the common sort of laments towards the self that I've noticed have been something like, I should have just stood up to him or her. I let them get away with treating me this way. I was weak. I was a coward. My nature is to be passive while others would have stood up and fought. I think there's a common theme in all this that really point to what is often the most sort of insidious effects of being bullied. And that is not the harsh treatment itself, but rather the question afterwards where the victim asks, why me? What was it about me that led to this? And that is a very common, they call it stuck point cognition in this style of treatment for PTSD called cognitive processing therapy, where when we face this really terrible situation, just as human beings, we're disinclined to believe that it was something outside of our control, but rather there was something we didn't do or should have done that would have afforded safety that didn't happen because of the thing we didn't do. So in essence, we have more control than we actually felt in that moment. And the truth is that, when we're treated traumatically, which is what happens in narcissistic abuse, I would submit that it's really a product of the narcissists themselves. And, when you think of narcissists in the population, they're a very small group. Unless, I don't want to quote statistics I'm not that familiar with, but I think it's less than a percentage, but around that type of incidence. So the unfortunate part, if you've grown up with a narcissistic parent who abused you in a scapegoated manner, is you knew that day in and day out, sort of longitudinally. So it could very much seem like this is the way the world is. And so these sort of, complaints about the self, like I should have stood up for myself and so forth, it was my fault, they actually can serve the function of saying, hey, when really bad stuff strikes, there's always something you can do. And that can afford a sort of a sense of survivability that's needed when the abuse is ongoing. It also, I should say, can often align with the attitude that's being displaced from the narcissist towards themselves onto the scapegoated victim. That is, that the victim here is deserving of the contempt that I would submit the narcissist feels for themselves, yet cannot bear it and must find it in the victim. So all this to say too that if a victim has had a narcissistic parent, that's been the preponderance of their experience with sort of what other people represent. But if we zoom out, they've had this experience of a narcissistic person, and they are few and far between in the broader population, this sort of being the normal distribution or bell curve. So the narcissists are way out on the tail of the bell curve. And so maybe a most accurate portrayal was, boy, I ran into a narcissist who you don't come across too often in life, and they really took me for a ride. I had my hands tied behind my back because they were my parent, and they had no qualms with seeing me as the source of every problem in their lives and in the family's lives. And boy, that was rotten, and that's all there was. That sort of conclusion is kind of what one would get to in the aftermath of a car accident. In a car accident, it's tremendously scary. Your survival can be in jeopardy. And, the first thought might be, after it's occurred and you survived it, might be, gosh, I just wasn't paying close enough attention to the road. And so long as I do that, I won't get in a car accident again. Well, the truth is there's always a small, again, maybe 1% risk of getting in a car accident every time we take the wheel. So the sort of correct conclusion in essence would be, I experienced the 1% risk there, and it was just plain awful. I'm so glad and fortunate I survived. When I take the wheel tomorrow, that 1% risk will still be there. I'm saying all this because, it just to contextualize both the reason for why these thoughts may occur and also how they might reflect a sort of post-traumatic effort at coping that may not, hopefully to the relief of survivors, may not actually be accurate. In fact, I would submit definitely are not accurate about the character, the true character of the scapegoated victim. So in thinking about one's process for how they've gone about recovering from this abuse, how they tried to live and lead their professional and personal and relational lives, some common sort of laments about themselves can be, I think too much about what others think about me. I don't let myself succeed as I should. I attract bad people to me. I should just be able to fill in the blank. What is wrong with me? And I should have addressed this years ago. It's almost too late now. So these kinds of appraisals of one's ways of assessing the manner in which they survive scapegoated abuse and the way they've gone about working to recover from it very much fit into the kind of scapegoated schema that is necessary to adopt to an extent in order to get through that abuse and survive it, which again, the title of today's is That's All There Is to Do in Scapegoated Abuse, is get through it by whatever means necessary. And, just to remind, if you've been scapegoated, particularly by a parent, then you've been trained at several sort of systemic levels: cognitive, neurophysiological, and emotional, physiological, physically, to find the self as the problem, almost as a fact of life or existence. And despite all this training, coercive training by the narcissistic family, aimed at really, I think, breaking the scapegoated victim's will to go on being, there's this inherent strength in that individual that persists and often knows that this training doesn't reflect some truer version of the world that the victim knows is meant for him or her. I don't know if anyone kind of gets into recovery without that kernel of belief and faith that is held in spite of all this tremendous adversity in the course of the abuse. That faith is also often the saving grace for the scapegoated victim that lets them get through it. So the scapegoated survivor, I think, and during the time of the abuse is in a very, has to negotiate, I think, this intersection of having hope for themselves and the life that truly meant for, and to leverage sort of blame or scapegoating of themselves just enough so that it's sort of safe enough to kind of progress in their hoped for direction. And I'll try to explain a little more about that. So, again, you're getting all this sort of relentless blame and derision and undermining by the narcissistic family and narcissistic parent. And in order for the scapegoated victim to harbor any hope for him or herself, they would have had to accept the accusations of their supposed wretchedness before it became safe to pursue some attempt to improve their quality of life. And I think survivors are familiar with just how dangerous it would have felt to like brazenly, show that they were efforting a course to kind of improve their lot in life or their own subjective quality of life. That would have typically put them directly in the crosshairs of the narcissistic parent or perhaps other family members to sort of bring that to the attention of the narcissist, because that would not be complying with the role of being the worthless one relative to the false superiority of the narcissistic parent. And so there can be this need to sort of, kind of like a Trojan horse strategy, shepherd one's sort of good intentions for oneself with some sense of like, this is wrong-headed, I'm still defective no matter what I do or what I achieve. And doing so offers enough safety from what would come at the survivor if they just were brazenly showing something that they wanted something more for themselves. And it lets them achieve the outcomes that they actually, in their heart of hearts, I think, want for themselves. So for instance, one, again, purely anonymized composite client here recalled planning, then engaging in rigorous exercise and study routines in high school and college, but only after determining that they were like horribly out of shape or terribly behind in their studies and never going to achieve the goals that they had for themselves in their lives. And so they could then engage in the activities necessary to, in this case, the goals being to get into good physical shape and to get good academic marks. They could work towards that, but only against this backdrop of like, if they don't do this, they're going to slip into this terrible, terrible place where nothing will be good, and they'll be so bad that they won't be even able to tolerate themselves. So that sort of like having to start from less than zero can be a very, very effective strategy in surviving this narcissistic abuse. So in this example, it was very functional. It also, it let them get under the radar of the narcissistic parent, but it also kept the person physically healthy and helped them make the academic progress that they really wanted to make and ultimately achieve a satisfying career. And it was that framework of meaning of, well, I'm playing from way behind that allowed them to get there. That's the only thing I firmly believe, and in the treatment was so important of working to accept that was the best there was that could have been done, and the person did it. So I think this sort of shepherding effort has some import into these ways of criticizing the way one survived their abuse, and then the ways they've taken to trying to recover from it. Because it really, I think, can meld well to this strategy of, efforting to do something but feeling fundamentally flawed in the undertaking of it. And I would submit that sort of, even if you notice that happening, to just sort of, again, I understand it may feel quite crummy and not good, but if there's a way to kind of notice the thoughts, again, invoking the mindfulness tactics and trying to cultivate a sense of, this is a strategy, and at one point in life, this was all that there was to be done, and I did it. It can be something to, again, over time, cultivate, and I think that the appreciation for that this was all that there was to be done does get to kind of gain traction within the self as this time elapses and the recovery efforts continue, which I think individuals who suffered this are sort of so oriented and I think strong in their will to recover. So I think it's a very reachable outcome for most survivors. And I would say that one thing that sort of helps in this process is that, over time, more facets of the situation may reveal themselves as one feels safer to know them and become aware of them, where this sort of fundamental abandonment of the position that one was put in as the scapegoated victim, and then needing to protect themselves, in the face of that abandonment, may grow more clearer, which then in a felt way or experiential way can really kind of undergird this sense that there was nothing else to do but survive what was survived. So the point of today's video is not to change anything or say you shouldn't blame yourself or not, or credit yourself more. I would submit that if that's happening, then it's a needed process at this point, and there's likely a very, although it wouldn't feel that way, I wholly respect, but still like a pro-self or sort of life function wrapped up in that blaming. The point of today's video is really to offer a framework for appreciating the utility of this sort of blame process or fault-finding process, so that actually in a paradoxical way, that appreciation may usher in a sense of respect and credit for what one has had to survive back then, or a little bit ago, and right now. In essence, is intended as a message of hope, but also of tolerance for how things are in the moment, and that they do sort of reveal themselves, I think, for the better, again, over time. And a core part of that can be the sort of coming to your own conclusion that there was nothing else to do in scapegoated abuse by a narcissistic parent or partner other than survive it. Well, thank you for tuning in this week. It's been good to get back and resume the weekly videos. And I look forward to posting again next week, back on the regular schedule, 9 a.m. PST on Sundays. Again, thank you everyone for your continued engagement with the channel, and I look forward to posting again. Take care.